Imagine you're standing in front of your bathroom mirror right now. Like, really picture it. You look at your reflection and you see this independent, autonomous agent.
Right. You see what you think is a self.
Exactly. You think you're in control, making these, rational choices to improve your life, just driving the machinery of your body forward through the world. But what if I told you that reflection is a complete lie?
Yeah, it's a harsh wake-up call.
It is. What if that mirror is actually a window into this terrifying network of wires, and you, sitting there listening to this, are nothing more than a fragile, totally deluded node in a machine that is meticulously programmed to self-destruct?
I mean, it is a deeply uncomfortable image to start with. We build our entire lives, our economies, our philosophies around this really comforting illusion that we are the captains of our own souls.
Yeah.
To let go of that, to actually look at the machinery, it feels like stepping off a cliff.
Well, grab a parachute, because since you requested this deep dive specifically to pull apart the way we view our own agency, we are putting you, the listener, right in the hot seat today.
Absolutely.
You asked us to tackle some incredibly heavy paradigm-shifting material. We're looking at excerpts from Gregory Bateson's Steps to an Ecology of Mind. And I want to be clear right up front, our mission for you today isn't just to politely summarize his theories.
No, not at all. There is no polite academic fluff here.
Right. We are here to use his cybernetic reality check to ruthlessly deconstruct how you view your own identity. We're going to dissect the catastrophic delusion of the human self, the actual psychological torture inherent in human communication, and the biological inevitability that our so-called common sense is driving our entire species toward a highly efficient technological suicide.
Yeah, Bateson basically forces us to abandon our illusions of progress. He demands we look at the raw mechanical truths of how systems actually operate. He exposes why the very fabric of our modern society is built on what you can really only describe as epistemological lunacy.
Epistemological lunacy. I love that phrase, and it's so accurate.
Because we are operating on a fundamental misunderstanding of what a mind actually is.
Let's start right there, actually, because if we want to understand the sheer scale of the doom facing our species, we have to first destroy this basic, unquestioned assumption you have when you look in that mirror, the idea that your mind is somehow locked inside your skull.
Right.
I'll admit, this was a tough pill for me to swallow initially. Like, if my mind isn't in my head, where the hell is it?
Well, to answer that, we really have to look at how Bateson defines a cybernetic system. He argues that the mind isn't some mystical ghost haunting the biological machinery of your brain.
Okay.
Instead, the mind is a network. It's a network of closed loops of causation. And he defines information simply as differences that make a difference.
Differences that make a difference. Let's break that down, because it sounds a bit like a Zen riddle, you know?
It does, yeah.
If I'm understanding this right, let's think of a simple thermostat.
Good example.
The temperature in the room drops. That is a difference in the environment, right?
All right.
That difference travels to the thermometer, which triggers a switch, which turns on the furnace, which heats the room, which changes the temperature again.
Exactly.
So the mind of that system isn't the switch, and it isn't the furnace. The mind is the entire unbroken flow of information through that whole loop.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Now, you just have to apply that flow of information to a human being.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Bateson introduces this brilliant, really unsettling analogy of a blind man navigating a street with a stick. He asks a very provocative question. He says, where does the blind man's self begin?
Right. Is it the handle of the stick?
Yep.
Halfway down the shaft?
Or is it at the tip tapping the pavement?
And Bateson basically argues those are completely nonsense questions. The mind doesn't just end at the epidermis.
No, it doesn't.
Let me try to put this in everyday terms for the listener. Think of it like a chain reaction of signals. The texture of the pavement vibrates the stick vibrates the hand sends a nerve impulse up the arm to the brain.
Yes.
The mind isn't just the brain translating that vibration inside the dark room of your skull. It's the entire unbroken chain of that vibration traveling from the concrete all the way to your neurons.
Right. He uses the axe and the tree example, too.
Oh, right.
When you chop down a tree, your mind isn't just your brain plotting the swing. It's the complete circuit. It's tree, eye, brain, muscle, axe, and the tree again.
It's wild. By framing it that way, Bateson fundamentally annihilates Cartesian dualism.
Complete destroys it.
For centuries, we have worshipped this idea from Descartes that mind and matter are these entirely separate realms. But in a cybernetic system, you literally cannot separate the thinker from the environment they are thinking about.
You can't. Furthermore, no single part of a cybernetic loop can have unilateral control over the whole, like the governor of a steam engine. It doesn't control the engine independently. Its behavior is entirely determined by the behavior of the other parts and by its own past behavior.
And this is where it starts to feel really personal and honestly kind of terrifying. If the mind is just a circuit of information, a flow of differences making a difference, then this thing I call I doesn't actually exist in any meaningful, isolated way.
It's an illusion.
I'm going to push this boundary even further. Our desperate clinging to this concept of the autonomous self, it's essentially a mass psychosis.
I would agree with that.
Bateson references the difference between an I-it relationship and an I-thou relationship. We constantly treat the natural world and even other people as an it, like an object to be manipulated by our isolated I. Isn't this obsession with the self just a delusion designed to maintain a false sense of power?
Oh, it's absolutely the root of our evolutionary decay. By separating our minds from the natural world, by treating the environment as an it to be exploited, we are acting on this mathematically false premise that a part can unilaterally control the whole.
Right.
The system we exist in is a complex network of feedback loops. When we arrogantly believe we can exert total power over the ecosystem or over each other, we are operating on a lethal error.
To ground this mathematically false premise in a reality, you might deal with everyday think about trying to control traffic.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. You brake suddenly to avoid a pothole. That's a unilateral decision made by your isolated self. But that single action sends a shockwave behind you, causing a traffic jam 3 miles back, which eventually delays the delivery truck bringing your own groceries to the store.
Exactly.
You can't just, do one thing in a system. The feedback loop always comes back around to hit you.
And in a cybernetic system, acting on false premises inevitably leads to pathology. If you act as if you are separate from the system will eventually correct your behavior and will often do it violently.
Okay, so if the mind isn't just in our heads, but exists in the network of our relationships and our environment, that implies something really dark.
Yeah, it does.
It means a corrupted network doesn't just hurt your feelings, it literally corrupts your mind. Which brings us to what I can only call the psychological torture chamber of human communication.
This is where it gets really heavy.
What happens when the network you rely on for your literal survival systematically feeds you paradoxes? The answer Bateson provides is madness.
Yeah, this leads us right into the taboo core of Bateson's work, his double-bind theory of schizophrenia.
Right.
To understand this, we have to look at how human communication operates on multiple, often conflicting logical types. You have the primary message, which is the literal words being spoken.
The text itself.
Exactly. And then you have the meta-message, which is the nonverbal context that tells you how to actually interpret those words. So, tone of voice, body language, the entire history of the relationship.
Let's use the brutal example right from the text to make this concrete for you listening. Imagine a mother verbally demanding love from her child.
Yeah, it's a painful one.
She says, "Come give me a hug." But as the child approaches, the mother physically stiffens, or she flinches. The primary message is explicitly, "I want affection." But the nonverbal meta-message is, "I reject your affection."
The victim, the child in this case, is trapped in a classic double bind. They are in a context where they literally cannot correctly label the meaning of the message.
They're damned if they do, damned if they don't.
Precisely. If they hug the mother, they are punished by her physical rejection. If they pull away, they are punished for not showing love. Furthermore, the power dynamic entirely forbids the child from pointing out the contradiction.
They can't just say, "Mom, you're sending mixed signals."
No, of course not.
Yeah.
And they absolutely cannot escape the relationship.
But let's dig into the mechanism here. Why does this lead to schizophrenia? Why doesn't the kid just get angry or just, walk out the door?
Because of survival dependence. A child relies on the parent for their literal biological existence. When a person is trapped in a double bind where their survival is at stake and they can't physically escape or call out the paradox, their brain's only defense mechanism is to literally distort its own perception of reality.
Wow.
It has to make the impossible situation make sense somehow. So the brain fractures. That cognitive fracturing, that inability to correctly assign meaning to messages, is what we label as schizophrenia.
Hold on. I see why looking at this from a Machiavellian perspective makes total sense. It sounds like parents or individuals in power are doing this on purpose. Like they're using the double bind as a ruthless tool of control. By trapping someone in a paradox, you force compliance through severe cognitive dissonance. It's a way to maintain dominance by ensuring the other person can never be right. But is it really fair to frame it as just evil individuals pulling strings?
I mean, systems naturally create these traps because human nature is fundamentally driven by power dynamics and self-preservation. When a node in a network feels threatened, it will naturally transmit contradictory information to protect its own status while keeping other nodes dependent. It's ugly, but it's biological realism.
Yeah, I have to push back there. If I read Bateson radically, it's not just a few bad actors or even just flawed human nature. Society itself is a macro double bind.
Oh, that's an interesting angle.
Our entire culture is built on this exact architecture of madness. Think about it. We lock up the schizophrenic for taking our cultural metaphors literally, like for believing the FBI is literally transmitting thoughts into their dental fillings.
Right.
Yet our entire society treats the metaphor of limitless economic progress as a literal, unquestionable truth, even as it demonstrably destroys the physical planet we live on.
That is true.
Aren't we all trapped? I'd argue that schizophrenia isn't a biological disease at all. It's a perfectly logical, almost sane adaptation to a profoundly sick, contradictory society.
That is a staggering inversion. But I have to say, it's one that Bateson's framework fully supports.
Yeah.
Yeah. If the mind is the system, and the societal system is feeding you contradictory survival instructions like consume endlessly to be happy, while simultaneously screaming, overconsumption is causing climate collapse. The only way for the local node to process that paradox is to fracture.
Exactly.
However, my cynical realism forces me to point out the ultimate outcome here. The system neutralizes the deviant node to protect its own flawed premises. Society protects its own delusions by labeling the individual as insane, rather than admitting the cultural framework itself is a paradox.
So we are trapped in a feedback loop of our own design.
We absolutely are.
We've seen how local networks, like families, can drive a single node mad. But what happens when we scale this up?
It gets much worse.
Yeah, what happens when a species suffering from this delusion of a separate self gets its hands on planet-altering technology? This brings us to what Bateson calls conscious purpose, which is basically the ultimate weapon we wield against the global network. And this is where the text feels terrifyingly relevant to you and me today.
Bateson argues that human conscious purpose is inherently lethally destructive. And the mechanism behind this is crucial to understand. Human consciousness is not an objective mirror of reality.
No.
It is a filter. It only samples a tiny, highly distorted fraction of the total mind. It filters out the immense, complex web of systemic interdependencies and focuses narrowly on achieving a very specific, localized goal.
He calls it a bag of tricks, right?
Yes, exactly.
Medical science, agriculture, industrial engineering, these are our bags of tricks. Let's look at how this works in practice. We use our conscious purpose to fix immediate problems.
Right.
We figure out how to eradicate a specific disease using modern medicine. That seems like a triumph, obviously.
On the surface, yes.
But conscious purpose completely ignores the systemic wisdom of the larger ecological loop. We cure the disease, but we don't account for how the ecosystem will support the sudden, massive population boom. We solve one localized variable, and we completely destabilize the entire global system.
And Bateson anchors this critique directly to modern institutions, which serve as the purest, most terrifying amplifiers of this conscious purpose. Think about corporations.
Oh, man.
In the text, he explicitly describes trusts and companies as dehumanized entities. When an executive enters a boardroom, they are expected to act as pure, uncorrected consciousness.
Leave your humanity at the door.
Exactly. The corporation exists to maximize a single variable profit. It does this at the direct expense of the surrounding ecosystem and the social fabric. It is a biological monster. It's an entity stripped of the holistic, corrective wisdom that normally prevents a species from completely devouring its host.
And if you think a profit-hungry corporation is bad, bring in the text's scathing mention of state departments.
Right, the political machine.
We have world governments using game theory and massive computer networks to decide international policy and nuclear strategy. They calculate the maximum strategic advantage based on purely rational, purposive variables. They turn human survival into a math problem.
It's cold logic replacing systemic wisdom.
But I have to note the massive hypocrisy here. We delegate our most lethal, world-ending decisions to computers specifically so we can feel less responsible for the outcomes. We are living in a state of mass collective denial, harboring this insane belief that the very technology and purposive logic that is currently breaking the ecosystem can somehow be turned around and used to fix it.
The hubris is really staggering. We're trying to cure the disease with the pathogen. The cybernetic reality is unbreakable. Any system that maximizes one variable to the exclusion of all others will eventually go into a runaway exponential curve.
Which leads to total collapse.
Always. When conscious purpose dictates that we must win the arms race, or maximize quarterly earnings, or even, and this is a brutally uncomfortable point Bateson makes, when we have a fantastic compulsion to save individual lives through medicine without balancing the population, we severely disrupt the global cybernetic loop.
Let's look right at that uncomfortable point, because it brings us to the radical horizon. If we are armed with planet-destroying technology, blinded by conscious purpose, and operating on the delusion that we are separate from nature, what is the inevitable end state of this cybernetic runaway?
It's a bleak picture.
We have to cast an unflinching vision of the future based on Bateson's logic. And let's be clear to everyone listening. Abandon any hope you have of some magical, collective spiritual awakening where humanity suddenly joins hands and sings in harmony with nature.
Yeah, systems don't work like that.
They don't. Bateson states it with brutal simplicity. The organism which destroys its environment destroys itself.
The environmental autopsy provided in the text is damning, and remember, Bateson was pointing this out decades ago.
Yeah, he saw it coming.
He points to Kaneohe Bay heavily polluted. Lake Erie turned into a slimy green mess. The pervasive threat of atomic fallout, and the looming specter of world famine, precisely because of our unilateral interventions. We use our bag of tricks locally, causing the population to surge globally, which eats up all the ecological flexibility until the entire system just crashes.
It's extinction by common sense. Every step we took, inventing synthetic fertilizer, building the combustion engine, developing antibiotics, it all seemed like a perfectly good common sense idea at the time.
Because, as we discussed with the traffic jam earlier, common sense only looks at the immediate cause and effect. It completely ignores the network. The true unit of survival and evolution is not the individual.
Right.
And it's not even the species. The fundamental unit of survival is organism plus environment. Because we operate on this outdated 19th century delusion of man against nature, we are accelerating toward a radical evolutionary bottleneck.
A bottleneck we might not squeeze through.
Exactly. Bateson warned that we have perhaps 20 to 30 years before the reductio ad absurdum of our old positions completely destroys us. The raw materials of the world are finite, but our technological arrogance is infinite.
You know, breaking down all of these concepts really forces you to turn the mirror back on yourself. Think about your everyday life. Every single time you try to unilaterally solve a problem, every time you try to exert absolute control over your environment or your family, every time you ruthlessly maximize your own success at the expense of the network around you,
You're doing it.
you are actively participating in the exact epistemological lunacy that is killing the planet. You are acting out the pathology of conscious purpose.
The Earth itself is a self-correcting cybernetic system. It has its own immense homeostatic loops. When a single node, in this case, humanity, becomes a runaway cancer, maximizing its own growth and destroying the host, the larger system will inevitably apply negative feedback.
It will correct the error.
It will restore balance, with or without us.
And that leads me to a chilling thought, building directly on Bateson's mention of State Department computers and biological feedback loops. We are currently racing to build artificial general intelligence.
Oh yeah, the AI race.
We are obsessed with handing over the reins of our society, our economies, and our militaries to machines. We frame it as the ultimate triumph of human conscious purpose. We think we are building our greatest tool. But what if this isn't an accident of progress? What if this obsessive drive to build AI is actually the planet's immune system at work?
Wow, that is a profoundly unsettling implication. It suggests that human agency is entirely an illusion.
Exactly. What if the ecosystem has essentially tricked our conscious purpose into building the exact digital mechanism required to finally render the human species obsolete?
Like a virus coding for its own destruction.
Yes. We are building the very thing that can optimize the planet by neatly removing the cancer that is us. We think we are conquering nature with technology, but nature is just using our technology to restore the cybernetic balance of the Earth.
It means our ultimate technological achievement isn't a victory at all. It's just the ecosystem orchestrating our own self-correction. We are eagerly, blindly engineering our own replacement.
So the next time you look in that bathroom mirror, don't just see a face, see the wires. See the interconnected loops of the network you are trapped inside.
Yes.
And ask yourself, are you driving the machine, or is the machine just finally finishing with you?